So hello, my name is Bruce Sleeman. I am a systemic family therapist working in private practice. I work with multiple range of issues, and today I'm here to have a conversation with my colleague Lana. Would you like to introduce yourself a bit there, Lana?
Well, Bruce, as you know, I'm also a systemic psychotherapist, and I also work in the private practice, and I teach in university, and I work with the families of asylum seekers and refugees as well in one of organizations in Ireland.
I suppose that's what we're here to talk about is around people working or living under direct provision primarily. Those are the people you work with. And this is an area I'm really interested in, but don't know a huge amount about. So I'm interested to learn more. So maybe you could just start off by telling me a little bit about just the context of your work and what it is you do with people in direct provision.
Well, Bruce, I'm working in the area for maybe last 6 years. And in that while I'm working with families, mainly I work also with few individuals from systemic perspective. And I'm actually facilitate groups with people who find themselves in a situation of seeking an asylum or being a refugee. So, and in terms of, just to say a bit more, so families could be very small from, say, mother and child, or father and child, to the family of, I'm just thinking what would be the biggest number, maybe parents and 4 children. And it would be also a context of some people speaking great English and some people having no English or very limited capacity. I suppose my context is that I'm very lucky that I have access to interpreters.
Okay.
And if needed and people feel they want to avail of interpreters, I have a chance to book somebody and have person in the room. It actually could be another interesting conversation about having somebody interpreting.
I imagine that's quite a challenge because so much of what we do is based around language and understanding and getting to the root of things. I'm guessing you probably use many different techniques. Like what would be the sort of the things you would do on a regular basis, or the common problems that you're finding that come up?
Well, Bruce, people find themselves having a complex problems, and like I suppose as a systemic practitioners, we also look at people and the families in this entire space, like what's going on in life in different areas. And besides dealing a lot with the trauma, because in my work, my referrals I get, it's practically all people who went through the trauma and torture and the war zones and have quite a complex history of trauma. And yet also what I find myself dealing with and people dealing with, so I'm supporting them through this process, is quite a practical issues. It's like a legal issues, like navigating asylum processes. How do you do that? How do you access the education? How do you access if there's a possibility of employment? How do you talk to the solicitor? How do you talk to the GP? How do you do maybe all of these things that you nearly take for granted
So
when you're in the country?
do you find yourself giving a lot of information then out, or is it more about empowering people to reach out to the right services, or a bit of both?
I would say it's a bit of both. Uh, I would give information what I know, because as a systemic practitioner, as a family therapist, I'm not a social worker
Yeah.
and I'm not a legal person. So I'm lacking in knowledge. In one way, I'm really lucky. In organization I work in, I have access to the people who have more knowledge than me.
Mm.
But quite often it's creating the link and supporting people to feel more confident. Because quite often it also burns down to, oh, I don't want to call to my solicitor. I'm bothering them too much. I'm afraid to make that connection. I'm not saying it's the case with everyone, but people sometimes feel quite frightened.
I'm wondering about cultural differences and stuff. You know,
There's
there's different ways of interacting with the professions and.
huge. huge, and it depends because I have such a variety of people from different countries, from different continents, but I really see like how people approach differently. So say from some countries, people say even call me like a doctor, and I would be really held in an expert position. That ladies, they understand that the psychologist, it's a doctor, so you have to do as she say.
Mm.
So, and a lot of professions would be uh, held in a very high rank. So, and it's really kind of up down, nearly expected approach. From other countries, people more like, no, there needs to be more kind of connection. But quite often I find what people call once or twice and then wait and deal with uncertainty, then don't hear for months and months about their legal process or not understanding it, and fearful of being deported, and all the things in between. So it's quite a huge one.
I suppose that the thought that came into my head, and you sort of said, well, you work with people who have experienced great trauma, and obviously people who are refugees are coming from worse situations, so there's trauma inherent, where you'd expect there to be some trauma for a lot of people. But I'm thinking about once they actually get here to Ireland and into the system, like you hear these stories about the difficulties of direct provision and how it isn't a working system. I suppose I'm wondering, do you find that people are sort of re-traumatized or traumatized in a different way by the system, or are they managing okay, or?
Bruce, it really depends. Even like if I would pick something up what you said, like if refugees, and maybe you're not familiar, like many people, with a process, say like when you enter on the land of Ireland, you're an asylum seeker.
Hmm.
So, and it's a certain rights comes with that.
Okay, yeah.
And like you would hope in the end to get a refugee status, which would give you completely different set of rights. So, and that process in theory should take a year and a half. In reality, for a lot of people, if you would imagine somebody in a system for 8 years with uncertainty, would I be given refugee status and allowed to stay in the country, or I would be really asked to leave? So it's like lives on hold. So process can re-traumatize in its own right. And as a family therapist, it's really a fine balance. How do you address both? So because some things needs to be dealt with and before any trauma could be really worked on, or you can only touch on trauma at times, not knowing too deep.
I'm wondering there, because obviously, as you said, like we are systemic family therapists, and you said you work with individuals, but you also work with families. And I'm wondering about maybe the different, or the challenges that are, I suppose, unique to the kind of work we do working with families. In these countries, we have families coming, parents and a few children who are living in that limbo for a period of time. What sort of stuff do you see there?
Well, Bruce, what I see how family functions or doesn't function.
Mm.
And quite often, if it's somebody in asylum seeking context, it likelihood family is sharing one room in direct provision. If somebody in refugee status, maybe people already have a house or apartment and have access to social welfare. But leaving that aside as well, like it's how what kind of conflicts arise, how maybe trauma plays out, who adapts better, where's the guilt and the shame, and where like it's quite would say common stuff. So that maybe children pick up the language much faster, and they become the interpreter for a parent in the many
Shift in the power dynamic in the family.
exactly, which quite often not that helpful. It's helpful on some level, but so it serves a point. But on another level, it's completely sends family in disarray. So it's really fine lines there.
Just a thought that occurred to me there, just it's a family living in a room together, and obviously for years, and that changes over time as kids grow up and the different needs change. But I suppose I'm wondering, obviously we've been through this COVID lockup for 3-4 months, and the kind of work I do with Irish families, that they've been struggling being locked up together in large homes for 3 or 4 months. I'm sort of thinking, is that even just the briefest insight for people into how people in direct provision are living on a much longer term basis?
I would say it's a some insight. I'm wondering, is it like completely the same insight as
I
like,
don't think it is completely the same, but I'm just like a very
uh,
minor insight into that must
but
be
I
quite
would
tough.
say so. I would say you would maybe say, oh, that's how it might look like, or how it would might look like more if there was a 3 children in one room and myself and my wife. So it's something like that. And I think sometimes people also, they're aware of it on one level, and on another level, it really becomes the norm and boundaries really blur. And like intimacy and all, how do you do conflict, all of that is kind of there.
Normal functioning of a family gets thrown
And
in.
how do you deal with someone if like somebody is suicidal or self-harming? It's a lot going on. So it's like it's a huge amount of work which goes into it. And not only by me as a family therapist, but by a lot of other people as well.
I suppose I'm thinking, just like, in my work, I see so many different people, so many different difficulties, so many different challenges. And I'm guessing it's no different when working with people in direct provision. There's so many differences, so many different things going on, so many challenges, plus the common challenge they all have of going through this direct provision system. It's like it just seems like so much, and I'm sure it can seem overwhelming for the families at times, but also for the therapist. There's so much to be done. It kind of makes me, well, how do you manage to do this work, and what is it that keeps you doing this kind of work?
Well, I suppose like it's not always all that doom and gloom. And when I see people start doing better, it's really like, it's to be honest, it's quite a nice feeling when you see people coping and doing well. But I suppose for myself, one of the things why it, I suppose, in a way brought me to this line of work, I really genuinely understand what asylum seeker or refugee, it's not a gender, it's not nationality, it's not a profession, it's none of this. It's basically the fact that whatever happened in a homeland made person to leave. And part of me, I'm not going to go into that, but my family history, and I'm wondering if people watching it, like, and we talk here from Ireland, Irish histories, anyone nearly I find can find themselves in a situation where you're in a foreign land.
It's a very
And
Irish experience to have to leave our country to go elsewhere. Yeah.
and I had many conversations with my Irish friends about, I don't know, what did you call it, people, coffin ships or that, like, one-way ticket when you leave Ireland and you were never expected to come back. So it's like, just really, for me, it's really realizing what, by the end of the day, we are all human beings. And if people who are all in the country do well, if me or you do well, if my next door neighbor does well, if a new person in the country does well, it means, I know it sounds like, but a genuinely maybe happier, healthier society. That's kind of what keeps me, I think it keeps me motivated to a large extent. Plus very interesting cultural experiences. Like, oh my God, it's so rich.
Mm.
I don't know, am I answering?
Yeah, no, I think so. I suppose what I'm hearing is sort of that, we are all individuals, we all have our own individual problems, but we are also part of something larger than ourselves. The human species is, we are a communal species. We need people, we will work together, and it's not a zero sum game where some people have to do well, other people have to do badly. And, like, I suppose I understand the reward you're talking about, that when you work with people and they do start, their lives start to get better for whatever reason, that's really nice to be, and it's a privilege to be part of, to be even some part of helping them in some way.
Yeah, and in some way I spoke about challenges, but I could give so many examples when people blossom and they find new ways and people get the status and get, into work or education and they rebuild their lives. So it's like you find yourself on the land, you get the help, and then you become part of Irish society.
So,
And
look, so maybe that's a good place to finish up on a nice note.
thank you
Okay.
so much for
Look,
talking to
Anna, thank you so much for educating me, and we'll talk again. Take care.
me.
Family therapists work with individuals, children, couples, and families. You can find a therapist by visiting familytherapyireland.com. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be notified of future FTAI videos.